Hello, Isaac here. Welcome back to the channel. So, we've arrived at Book 4, The City of God by Augustine. And in this video, Augustine will continue to examine Roman religion, the role of the gods, and the implications for Roman society and the empire's success. And ultimately, Augustine will challenge the traditional beliefs of his time, but also offer insights into the true nature of happiness and a difference between earthly power and eternal blessings. So let's get straight into it with chapters 1 to 2, where Augustine begins by summarizing the twin themes of book 1 to 3 before considering the supposed pragmatic political value of paganism for the Roman Empire. Also, if you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate it, and if you could like the video or share it, and please do let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So, in chapter 1, Augustine summarizes the twin themes of books 1 to 3, which is to show from the books of the authorities recognized by his opponents that disasters happened long before Christian times, and to show that the gods of Rome are in fact deceptive demons. The reason for drawing on these authorities and Roman history is that the uneducated are, as he writes, stirred up by the authority of the learned to hate us more bitterly, thinking in their inexperience that things which have happened unwontedly in their days were not wont to happen in other times gone by. Nonetheless, Augustine has shown from their own authorities the true nature of the gods of Rome. They are demonic, and they, as he writes, take delight in crimes which, whether real or only fictitious, are yet their own, which it has been their will to have celebrated in honour of them at their own festivals. One authority he cites in this regard is Varro, who acknowledged the divine status of morally corrupt practices like the scenic plays, which should be condemned. In chapter 2, Augustine summarizes what he has done so far. He's addressed the various evils, both moral in book 2 and physical in book 3, that befell Rome and its provinces before Christian practices were established and pagan sacrifices prohibited. Augustine argues that he has touched upon only a fraction of the sufferings experienced for the city and its empire, focusing only from the period of its founding by Romulus in the 8th century to the era of Caesar Augustus, who died in 14 AD, and omitting the vast array of natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, and fires. Now, in the following book, Augustine will transition to discuss the growth of the Roman Empire, and will attribute its expansion not to the favour of the pagan gods, but to the true God. Therefore, he will consider what Roman values and customs the true God deigned, which helped extend their empire, and show that the gods of Rome, these wicked demons, did not in fact help. So in chapters 3 to 4, Augustine wants to demythologize the imperial ideology of the Roman Empire and show that it neither causes happiness nor deserves praise. In chapter 3, Augustine questions the wisdom and prudence of priding oneself on empire's size if such an expansion is achieved through the endless suffering and bloodshed of wars, and the empire's glory is as fragile as glass and its achievements hollow. In this regard, Augustine uses an analogy to make his point. He compares two men, one of poor or moderate wealth, living in a content, peaceful, and virtuous life, and the other one rich, but plagued by fears, discontent, and never-ending strife. The answer is clear, as he writes, "I know not whether anyone can be such a fool that he would dare hesitate which to prefer, as therefore in the case of these two men, so in the two families, in two nations, in two kingdoms, this test of tranquility holds good. Therefore, Augustine extends this analogy to nations and kingdoms, arguing that the greatness of an empire is not measured by its territories or power, but by the tranquility and virtues of its people. Therefore, wherever the true God is worshipped, with genuine rights and true virtue, real happiness is found, not just for the rulers, but for the people they govern. He writes, their piety and probability, which are great gifts of God, suffice to give them true felicity, enabling them to live well the life that now is, and afterwards to receive that which is eternal. Augustine contends that the rule of good men is advantageous for societal affairs and is for the benefit of their society. Importantly, good rulers do not engage in the endless expansion of empire and bloodshed of war. Nonetheless, in Augustine's view, the dominion of bad men harms primarily the rulers themselves as they succumb to their vices. The hardships imposed by unjust rulers serve not as punishment, but as tests of their virtue. Thus, a good person, even in slavery, possesses a form of freedom, but a wicked ruler is enslaved by his vices. In this regard, Augustine is drawing on Scripture and the idea of humanity's slavery to sin, but freedom in Christ. And he will quote, in this regard, Peter 2:19. They promise them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity, for people are slaves to whatever has mastered them. In chapter 4, Augustine will in fact compare empires to a band of robbers. The only real difference is merely one of scale and perception. It takes other people's possessions and accepts internal rules for disputing the loot. The transformation from a group of robbers to a recognized kingdom, Augustine suggests, does not result from abandoning their covetous behavior, but rather from their ability to commit their acts with impunity and on a larger scale. To illustrate this, he tells a story involving Alexander the Great and a pirate who had been seized by him. Augustine writes, for when the king had asked the man what he meant by keeping hostile possession of the sea, he answered with bold pride, what you mean by seizing the whole earth. But because I do it with a petty ship, I am called a robber, while you, who does it with a great fleet, are styled emperor. Therefore, Augustine seeks to challenge the glorification of conquest and power, showing that when the actions of an empire are detached from moral righteousness and justice, they are no better than a band of robbers. So with that, we move to chapters 5 to 7, where Augustine asks whether gods are thought to help anyone who holds power, such as the gang of gladiators who briefly threatened Rome, or the successive empires which preceded Rome. Therefore, in chapters 5, Augustine recounts the episode known as the Third Servile War, or the Spartacus Rebellion, which happened between 73 and 71 BC, when a group of runaway gladiators in Campania, who, after escaping from their servitude, managed to amass a formidable army under 3 leaders and inflict widespread devastation on the mighty Roman Republic. The point of this story, however, is to challenge the idea that the gods were selectively aiding the Romans or anyone else to achieve power or empire. In fact, it looks as though the gods aided this relatively small and initially insignificant band of escaped slaves to rise to such a level of power and become a fear-inspiring force, even against Rome. Some might question divine favour in the success of these gladiators, pointing to their longevity as a measure of divine support. Nonetheless, if longevity is the measure, no one truly receives divine aid, as all human endeavours are transient. As he writes, in that case too, the gods aid no one to reign, since all individuals quickly die, nor is sovereign power to be reckoned a benefit, because in a little time, in every man, and thus in all of them, one by one, it vanishes like a vapour. For what does it matter to those who worship the gods under Romulus, and are long since dead, that after their death the Roman Empire has grown so great, while they plead their cause before the powers beneath? Therefore, he argues against the significance of temporal power and glory, pointing out the futility of ascribing lasting importance to such achievements. When viewed in the context of the eternal, the fleeting nature of power and success means that even the most despised and lowly can rise to prominence and enjoy the spoils of victory, if only for a moment. If this is the measure of success and divine favour, then we should say that the gladiators too enjoyed divine favour, as he writes. If, however, even those benefits which last only for the shortest time are to be ascribed to the aid of the gods, these gladiators were not a little aided, who broke the bonds of their servile condition, fled, escaped, raised a great and most powerful army, obedient to the will and orders of their chiefs, and much feared by the Roman majesty, and remaining unsubdued by several Roman generals, seized many places, and having won very many victories, enjoyed whatever pleasures they wished, and did what their lust suggested, and until at last they were conquered, which was done with the utmost difficulty, lived sublime and dominant. The point, of course, is that neither the Romans nor Augustine believed that the gladiators enjoyed divine favour from the gods, and therefore divine favour is not measured by temporal power and glory. And so, in chapters 8, Augustine will critically examine the vast pantheon of the Roman deities, questioning which of these gods is responsible for the expansion and protection of their empire. The problem for Augustine is the fragmentation of divine responsibilities, which in fact makes it implausible to credit any of these deities with the grand achievements of Rome's empire building. Augustine aims to show the superiority of monotheism, where a single omnipotent God provides a stark contrast to the myriad of limited deities worshipped by the Romans, who can hardly be accredited to the grandeur and maintenance of the Roman Empire. Along these lines, in chapter 9, Augustine asks whether the grandeur and longevity of the Roman Empire should be attributed to Jove, that is Jupiter, who is the chief among the gods. Concerning Jove, he writes, "For they will have it that he is the king of all the gods and goddesses, as is shown by his scepter and by the Capitol on the lofty hill." Regarding Jove, Augustine mentions the respected Roman scholar Varro, who suggested that Jupiter is worshipped under different names, including by those who worship a singular god without images, such as the philosophically minded rational monotheists. Augustine, however, points out an inconsistency in the veneration of Jupiter. Regarding the creation of images or idols for Jupiter's worship, Varro voiced criticism, suggesting that such practices had tainted the authentic worship of Jupiter. If that is the case, Rome's successful empire building cannot be attributed to Jupiter, given their flawed and potentially ineffective worship. Furthermore, in chapter 10, Augustine shows that the singular authority and universality of Jupiter is undermined by the plurality of gods and the confusing rationale behind assigning different gods to various domains of the world. If Jupiter is the supreme deity, why are other gods like Juno or Neptune or Pluto designated to rule over specific domains such as the air, the sea, and the underworld, respectively? Not only are they assigned separate realms, but also provided with consorts, further complicating the divine hierarchy. Therefore, while all things are said to be full of Jove, the supreme deity, the physical is in fact divided among various deities, each with their own respective consorts. Besides this, Augustine points out the complex and contradictory nature of their deities. And so in chapter 11, Augustine addresses the argument made by some pagan philosophers, namely Neoplatonists, that the multitude of gods worshipped by the Romans can be understood as different aspects or manifestations of a single deity, Jupiter. These philosophers attempt to reconcile the polytheistic practices of Roman religion with a form of monotheism by suggesting that Jupiter, as the soul of the world, embodies various elements and forces of nature, thus incorporating all other gods and goddesses as parts of himself, There are, however, various problems with this for Augustine. For one, this explanation complicates the understanding of divinity unnecessarily. If all gods are aspects of Jupiter, then worshipping the multitude of deities becomes redundant, as worshipping Jupiter alone would suffice. It would be more consistent and logical to just worship the one god who represents all the aspects of Jupiter. Otherwise, given the vast array of divine beings, it would be impossible to show the equal and appropriate worship to God. In chapter 12, Augustine argues that if the supreme god, Jupiter or Jove, is a soul of the world, it would lead to absurd conclusions. If it were true, everything in the world, including inanimate objects and all living creatures, are part of God. Therefore, harming any part of the world would be harming God, which is blasphemous. In chapter 13, Augustine continues this line of critique, addressing those who believe only rational beings, like human beings, are part of God. But if all human beings are part of God, then sinful actions would imply the sinfulness of God, which is again unacceptable. And so you can see the inconsistencies of Roman paganism. And with that, he'll move on to the ways in which they ascribe the enlargement of the empire to Jove. So, in chapter 14, Augustine continues his critique of the polarity within the Roman Pantheon, questioning why the goddess Victory, rather than Jupiter, should be the deity responsible for the expansion of the Roman Empire. He argues that the goddess Victory alone should suffice for achieving conquests, rendering Jupiter unnecessary. Additionally, Augustine challenges the morality of seeking to expand the empire through unjust wars against peaceful neighbours. He suggests that this is reprehensible and that the gods who condone such actions and supposedly bring victory are equally blameworthy. This critique by Augustine is part of his unique contribution known as just war theory. This posits that war is justified only to address serious public evils such as defending against or rectifying significant wrongs. While most modern Western states influenced by Christianity uphold this view, it would have seemed strange in the ancient Roman world, which saw no issue with expansion for its own sake, whether for glory or for the acquisition of land and resources. For Augustine, if these military successes are attributed to the goddess Victory, then they might as well attribute the causes of war, such as the injustice of Roman expansion, to the goddess of injustice. In chapter 15, Augustine argues that it's virtuous to live in peace with good neighbours and implies that the expansion of an empire is always the result of unjust wars. He suggests that the ideal situation, embodying pious and just principles, would be a world where many kingdoms coexist harmoniously without any single expansive empire. And so he writes that without unjust wars, human affairs being thus more happy, all kingdoms would have been small, rejoicing in neighbourly concord, and thus there would have been very many kingdoms of nations in this world, as there are many houses of citizens in a city. Augustine's vision, in some sense, became a reality in the Middle Ages after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, where there were many small kingdoms which were united by a shared Christian faith, providing a common religious and moral framework that transcended local political boundaries. This shared Christian identity often encouraged cooperation among Christian rulers and discouraged wars of expansion against fellow Christian kingdoms, promoting the idea of a united or unified Christendom. And so with that, I guess we'll move on to the ways in which polytheism deifies divine functions. In chapter 16, Augustine discusses the practice of assigning distinct gods to various aspects of life and emotion, such as agena to incite action, stimula to promote intense action, and ageria to promote slothfulness. Despite this extensive pantheon, the goddess Qs, who represented tranquility, was worshipped outside the gate, rather than within the public temples. Augustine writes concerning this, whether was this a symptom of an unquiet mind, or rather was it thus intimated that he who should persevere in worshipping that crowd, not to be sure of gods, but of demons, could not dwell with quiet, to which the true physician calls, saying, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. Augustine suggests that the worship of the goddess and tranquility outside the city gates indicates that no true peace and tranquility can coexist with the worship of many gods, implying that Christ is the true source of rest. Along these lines, Augustine argues that if Felicity, representing happiness and good fortune, is a goddess, then she alone should be worshipped. But they also worship Fortune, who can bring both good and bad luck. The issue is that Felicity rewards the good for their merits, while Fortune brings luck indiscriminately to both good and bad. The problem is that if Fortune acts blindly without merit, worshipping her is in fact pointless. But if Fortune responds to worship, she is not truly Fortune. Moreover, if Fortune is under the control of Jupiter, then only Jupiter should be worshipped. In other words, the distinction between Felicity and Fortune is meaningless and contradictory. Augustine further argues in chapter 20 the absurdity of deifying concepts like virtue and faith, giving them temples and altars. As Augustine argues, however, virtue being a gift from God should not be worshipped, but rather sought through prayer to the true God. Likewise, it is absurd to worship faith, especially since true faith involves belief in the true God. Besides this, the Romans are inconsistent for honouring some virtues as deities while ignoring temperance, fortitude, prudence, and wisdom. Therefore, virtue and felicity are not deities, but gifts from the true God, which should be obtained through prayer rather than idol worship. Nonetheless, as Augustine suggests in chapter 21, if felicity and virtue are truly divine and sufficient, there is no need for other gods. Romans attributed different roles to other gods, such as protecting childbirth, granting wealth, or ensuring victory in war, but felicity should be able to provide all of these blessings and protect against misfortunes, making worship of other gods unnecessary. Along these lines, he discusses the work of the scholar Varro in chapter 22, who detailed which gods to worship and the specific powers each held. He likened it to the roles of various professionals, such as a physician or a baker, to obtain necessary services. Knowing the specific abilities is crucial to properly invoke specific needs. But for Augustine, this whole method is misguided, and if felicity and virtue are truly divine, there is no need for the rest of the Pantheon. However, as he writes in chapter 23, the absurdity is that felicity was not worshipped from the beginning. If felicity was capable of granting happiness and good fortune, Augustine questions why it took so long for her to receive a temple, and why it was not prioritized over Jupiter, Mars, and others. They should have built her the most prominent temple, as she presents the ultimate goal of all their desires. In fact, as he argues in chapter 25, true felicity or happiness can only come from a single god. Those who worshipped many gods, including Jupiter, recognized this when they created the deity Felicity. But this goddess is only a stand-in for the unknown God who grants true happiness. And he argues that people ought to abandon worship of many gods and demons and instead turn to the one true God, the giver of true felicity. And this is not Jupiter, because he is disqualified because of his immoral attributes. Therefore, Augustine urges people to turn to the one true, perfectly good and holy God of Christianity. And with that, Augustine will turn to Varro's tripartite scheme of the mythical, natural, and civic. Augustine discussed in chapter 27 the classification of the gods by Roman pontiff Scaevola, following a tradition from Varro, into three categories: those introduced by the poets, those defined by philosophers, and those acknowledged by statesmen. The poetic derives from Homer, Hesiod, and other poets, where gods engage in human-like adventures, conflicts, and relationships. The philosophical comes from the likes of the Stoics and the Epicureans, who approach gods as rational entities or even as metaphors for natural laws and forces. And the civic or political include rituals and ceremonies designed to ensure the welfare and stability of society, with deities like Jupiter, Mars, and Vesta who have specific roles in public life and were worshipped in state-sponsored temples and festivals. Scaevola recognized the primary importance of the civic or political and criticized the poetic gods as trifling and unworthy, since it was filled with tales of immoral behavior. But he also finds the philosophical gods as unsuitable for public worship because they reveal truths that could be harmful to common people. Therefore, Scaevola's position reflects a popular pragmatic view of religion among the Roman elite. While he acknowledged that the myths might not be literally true, and that philosophical ideas offer deeper explanations, he saw the practical value maintaining the poetic and civic aspects of religion. Scaevola believes that it is beneficial for the state to deceive people about religious truth to maintain social order. Augustine condemns this approach, arguing that it perpetuates false beliefs and honours to gods who are morally corrupt. He challenges Scaevola to remove the scenic plays that celebrate moral acts if he truly believes in upholding a dignified image of the gods. The fact that these gods delight in such dishonourable betrayals and even demand them makes it quite clear for all to see that they are not deities but malevolent beings, not worthy of worship. And so, according to the tradition of Scaevola, recorded by Varro, there is a practical value maintaining the poetic and civic aspects of religion, even if it is false or morally corrupt. The chief practical value which Augustine will now address is the growth and preservation of the Roman Empire. In response, Augustine argues that those gods who enjoy being honoured through immoral and scandalous depiction in plays could not have been the source of Rome's success, given that the Greeks practiced similar worship with even more rigour, but did not achieve the same empire building. The heart of the issue is that the Roman elite and the philosophers recognise the falsehood and immorality of the gods, but they support traditional worship for the sake of social order. In this regard, he discusses the views of Varro, a Roman scholar who admitted that if he founded a new state, he would have established the gods differently, according to the natural order. Augustine acknowledges that Varro came close to recognising the truth and points out that if he had been free from societal restraints, he might have advocated the worship of a singular, imageless god. Therefore, Varro's views are used by Augustine to show that the false practice of polytheism was recognised by their own scholar. In fact, Varro suggested that Roman leaders fabricated stories of the gods and their genealogies, knowingly perpetuating false beliefs. For Augustine, this mirrors the actions of demons who deceive people to gain power over them. The call from Augustine is quite clear: turn to Christ. There is, in fact, an alternative. And so with that, we'll turn to the last section. In the final section, in chapters 33 to 34, Augustine explains that the true God is the source of all happiness and controls the distribution of earthly kingdoms to the good and bad alike. Now, the worship of the Roman gods was to many of the Roman elite and philosophers pragmatic. They granted and enabled the growth and preservation of the Roman Empire. Nonetheless, for Augustine, the distribution of kingdoms is neither random nor based on fortune, but governed by God's perfect knowledge and order, which is beyond human understanding. In this regard, earthly power is given both to the righteous and the wicked, and is not a direct blessing from the one true God, as was believed of the Roman gods. For Augustine, earthly power is bestowed upon both the righteous and the wicked, but true happiness is granted only to the good in this life, those who worship the one true God. This ultimate happiness is then fully realized in eternal life. Therefore, for Augustine, earthly gifts, such as power or kingdoms, is not to be mistaken with ultimate blessing. The only exception to this was the kingdom of the Jews, as he highlights that this was established by the one true God. They thrived and multiplied in Egypt without invoking pagan deities for childbirth, nourishment, or protection. God delivered them from the Egyptian oppression through miraculous events like the parting of the Red Sea, providing manna in the desert and bringing water from the rock. Their success in agriculture, war, and all aspects of life came from the sole worship of the one true God. Nonetheless, this was taken from them due to their disobedience and their turning to idols. If they hadn't turned away from God, they would have maintained their kingdom, even being more blessed than the Roman Empire. But despite what happened, their dispersion serves to demonstrate the accuracy of prophecies in their scriptures and validates the Christian narrative. So, that is it for Book 4 of Augustine's City of God. As we saw, he continues his critique of the Roman religion and the perceived divine favour behind the Roman Empire's success. He ultimately underscores the inconsistency and the immorality of the worship of the Roman gods, pointing out that even the Roman philosophers and scholars like Scaevola and Varro recognized the problematic aspects of these beliefs, but maintained them for societal cohesion and political stability. Augustine vehemently opposes this pragmatic approach, asserting that promoting falsehoods, even for societal benefit, is inherently wrong. Ultimately, Augustine posits that true happiness and eternal life are granted only to those who worship the one true God. He contrasts the temporal and often morally dubious successes attributed to the Roman gods with the eternal and righteous nature of Christian worship. Thus, he calls for a rejection of pagan practices and a turn toward Christian truth, which he sees as the only path to genuine felicity and divine favour. So, thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Again, please do let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you have enjoyed it, please do click the like button and subscribe for future videos. And that is it for me. I'll see you in the future. Okay, bye.